Hello and welcome. Today we're jumping into a topic that's way more than just a box you have to check in a business class. We're talking about managerial ethics. And honestly, in today's world, this is a critical survival skill for anyone who wants to lead. I mean, think about it. A single bad decision can go viral and bring down a whole company. So understanding ethics, it's not optional anymore. We're going to go way beyond the dry abstract theory and get right into the real-world, messy dilemmas you're actually going to face. This is your practical guide for how to handle those gray areas and make the right call when the pressure is on.
It really all boils down to this one big question, doesn't it? Why do good people, people like you and me, sometimes do really bad things at work? We see it in the news all the time, right? Huge companies, caught in major scandals. These places aren't run by cartoon villains. They're full of thousands of smart, decent people who probably thought they were doing the right thing. So what goes wrong? What happens inside an organization that leads people astray? That's the puzzle we're going to piece together today, because if you can understand the why, you're halfway to preventing it.
And the fallout from these bad choices is never, ever small. Just look at this web of consequences. A single unethical decision, let's say fudging some numbers on a report, it doesn't just hurt some faceless investors on Wall Street. It creates a ripple effect. It can lead to massive layoffs that completely devastate employees and their families. If you mislead customers, you destroy the trust that took years to build. If you cut corners on environmental safety, you can harm an entire community. This isn't just theory. These are the real-world stories behind the headlines, and they've created a massive crisis of trust in business today. So when we talk about ethics, we're not just talking about keeping the lawyers happy. We're talking about a core responsibility to every single one of these groups.
So, how are we going to tackle all this? Well, here's our roadmap. First, we'll get on the same page and figure out what ethics really means in a business setting. Then, I'm going to give you a fantastic decision-making toolkit with 5 different lenses you can use to look at any problem. After that, we'll turn inward and look at a manager's own moral compass. Then, we'll zoom out to the big picture, corporate social responsibility. We'll get super practical and break down how you actually build an ethical organization from the inside out. And of course, I'm not going to leave you hanging. We'll finish with a pro tip to make sure you absolutely ace any exam question on this stuff.
Okay, let's dive in and start with the absolute fundamentals. Before we can start making tough ethical calls, we all need to be working from the same playbook. So, in this first section, we're going to pin down exactly what we mean by ethics, and maybe just as important, what we don't. So here's the official textbook definition, but let's actually unpack what these words mean. Code, principles, values. A code means there's a system to it, right? It's not just a random gut feeling. Principles are those basic truths that guide how we act. And values are the things we really care about, the things that drive our choices. The takeaway here is that ethics isn't just some vague, fuzzy feeling of right and wrong. It's a structured framework that helps us make decisions. It's the internal compass that guides you when the rules aren't clear, and it's really about what you do when you think nobody's watching.
I love this slide because it perfectly shows you where the real challenges are. So think of all human action falling into one of 3 buckets. Over on one side, you have the domain of codified law. This is black and white. It is illegal to steal from your company. End of story. Over on the other side, you have the domain of free choice. What kind of coffee you serve in the break room? Totally up to you. But right there in the middle, that's the domain of ethics. That's the gray area. For example, is it illegal to outsource jobs to a country with cheaper labor? Nope. But is it the right thing to do? That's a much harder question. And that's exactly where great managers prove their worth, by navigating these complex situations that aren't spelled out in any law book.
Okay, so you find yourself in that gray area. The pressure's on, a decision has to be made. What do you do? Well, you don't have to just guess. You can reach into your ethical decision-making toolkit. In this section, we're going to walk through 5 really powerful frameworks that will help you look at any problem from different angles. Think of them like a set of lenses in a pair of glasses. Each one helps you see the situation in a new light.
All right, let's really get into these because they're super important. First up, we have the utilitarian approach. This one is all about the outcome. You basically do a moral math problem. Which decision will produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people? A classic example is a car company issuing a recall. Sure, it's going to cost them a fortune, but it prevents potential accidents for thousands of drivers. The overall good outweighs the company's financial hit. The challenge here, of course, is that someone has to decide what good means, and this approach can sometimes ignore the impact on the minority. Next, there's the individualism approach. Now, this one sounds selfish, but it's not what you think. It argues that acting in your own long-term best interest is what's best for everyone. The logic is that if we all pursue our own long-term goals, we'll build a better society. Think about a manager who invests heavily in employee training. In the short term, it's expensive. But in the long term, those skilled, loyal employees will make the manager and the company more successful. It's about enlightened self-interest. Then we have the moral rights approach. This one's different. It says forget the consequences for a second. Some things are just fundamentally right or wrong. People have certain basic human rights that should never be violated, like the right to safety, privacy, and free speech. So from this perspective, a company that sells customer data without their explicit consent is doing something wrong, period. Even if it makes a lot of money and creates a greater good for shareholders. Fourth is the justice approach. This is all about fairness, equity, and impartiality. It asks if we're treating people fairly. And there are different kinds of justice. There's distributive justice. Are we handing out rewards and punishments fairly? There's procedural justice. Are our rules and processes applied the same way to everyone? A great example is pay equity. If two people have the same job and the same qualifications, they should get the same pay regardless of their gender, race, or anything else. That's the justice approach in action. And finally, we've got the practical approach. This is your gut check. It's sometimes called the front page test. Before you do something, ask yourself, would I be okay with this decision being the front page headline in the New York Times? Would I be okay with my family and friends reading about it? If you feel a knot in your stomach just thinking about that, it's a huge red flag that you're heading down the wrong path.
So now you've got this awesome toolkit with 5 different lenses. But here's the thing. The best tools in the world won't help much if the person using them doesn't have a solid moral compass. So that's what we're going to look at next. How a manager's own personal stage of moral development shapes every single choice they make.
This chart shows a really powerful idea from a psychologist named Lawrence Kohlberg. He found that people's moral reasoning evolves through 3 distinct levels. At level 1, the pre-conventional level, it's basically all about me. Your decision-making is driven by self-interest. You follow the rules to avoid punishment, or you do things to get a reward. The leadership style here is often autocratic, do it because I'm the boss. As people mature, most move into level 2, the conventional level. This is where most adults operate. Here, you're guided by what society and the people around you expect. You follow the rules because you want to be seen as a good person and maintain social order. You live up to the expectations of your team and your company. The leadership style here is much more about teamwork and fitting in. But the highest stage is level 3, the post-conventional level. And honestly, not many people get here. At this level, you're guided by your own deeply held universal principles of right and wrong, things like justice and equality. You'll do what you believe is right, even if it means breaking a rule or going against the crowd. These are servant leaders who are focused on the greater good. The real goal for any aspiring leader is to push themselves to operate from level 3. Okay, so we've been looking at the individual manager and their choices. But of course, no manager is an island. Every single business is part of a bigger social and environmental ecosystem, and its actions can have a huge impact. That brings us to our next big topic, corporate social responsibility, or CSR for short. This is where we zoom out from me to we.
So what is CSR? At its heart, it's a simple but really profound idea. A business has a duty to do more than just make a profit. It has an obligation to be a good citizen. This means that when managers make decisions, they need to think about how those actions will affect not just the company's bank account, but also the well-being of society and the planet. It's about that dual responsibility, to the organization and to the community.
So when we say a company has a responsibility to society, who are we actually talking about? Well, it's not some vague cloud of people. It's made up of very real groups that we call stakeholders. And as you can see from this map for DAP Inc., that web of stakeholders is huge and interconnected. Of course, you've got the obvious ones, employees who want fair wages, customers who want safe products, and investors who want a return. But it's so much bigger than that. You've also got suppliers, the local communities where you operate, governments, and even activist groups. A truly responsible company gets that it has to create value for all these stakeholders, not just the people who own stock.
This is one of the most famous models in business ethics. It's Carroll's pyramid of corporate social responsibility. Let's build it from the bottom up to really understand it. The foundation of the entire pyramid is economic responsibility. Look, if a company doesn't make a profit, it can't do anything else. It goes out of business. So first and foremost, a business has to be profitable. That's the base. Next up, you have legal responsibility. This means you have to play by the rules. You have to obey all the laws and regulations of the society you operate in. This is the price of admission to do business. It's non-negotiable. But just because something is legal doesn't mean it's right. That brings us to the third level, ethical responsibility. This is about going beyond what the law requires. It's about being fair, just, and doing the right thing, even when no one is forcing you to. It's about avoiding harm and respecting moral standards. And then, at the very top of the pyramid, you have discretionary responsibility. This is about being a truly good corporate citizen. This is where a company voluntarily gives back to society through things like charitable donations, employee volunteer programs, or initiatives to improve the community. A truly great company isn't just profitable, it actively works to be a positive force at all four of these levels.
Okay, we've covered a ton of theory. Now let's bring it all home and get super practical. How do you actually create a company where being ethical isn't just a slogan and a mission statement, but is baked into the DNA of the culture? That's what we're going to break down now.
Building an ethical organization is a lot like building a solid house. It doesn't just happen on its own. It has to be designed and built with intention. And the absolute foundation of that house is ethical leadership. Everything starts at the top. If the leaders aren't walking the talk, none of the other stuff matters. Then you build a structure, the walls, the roof. These are the formal systems. This includes having a clear code of ethics that everyone understands. It means having an ethics committee or a chief ethics officer to champion the cause. It means doing regular ethics training, not just once during onboarding. And this is a huge one. It means having structures that protect whistleblowers, the brave people who speak up when they see something wrong. You need safe, confidential channels for them to report issues without fear of retaliation.
So, let's put it all together. You're at your desk, you're faced with a really tricky ethical problem. What do you actually do? Here's a simple 3-step framework you can use every single time. Step 1. Gather the facts and identify the stakeholders. Get clear on what the actual problem is. No assumptions. And then make a list of every single person or group who could be affected by your decision. Step 2. Analyze the options using your toolkit. Now, pull out those lenses we talked about. Look at the problem from at least 2 different perspectives. What does the utilitarian approach suggest? What about the moral rights approach? See how they might lead you to different conclusions. This step is about adding rigor to your thinking. Step 3. Make and justify your decision. Okay, time to make a call. But don't just state your decision. You have to be ready to defend it. Justify your choice using the frameworks and your stakeholder analysis. Basically, you have to show your work.
All right, it's that time. Let's talk about how you take all this amazing knowledge and turn it into a top grade on your exam. This is the pro tip section, where we focus on how to show what you know when it really counts.
So, here's what you should expect to see on an exam. The most common thing is a case study. You'll get a page or two describing a company facing a tough dilemma. Maybe they've found a flaw in their product, or they're considering a partnership with a questionable supplier. Your job will be to break down that situation using the concepts we've talked about. You'll have to identify the stakeholders, apply a few of the ethical frameworks, and recommend what the company should do. The goal here isn't to test your memory of definitions. It's to test your ability to apply these tools to a messy, real-life problem.
And here it is. This is my #1 most important pro tip for getting full marks on any ethics question. Your final decision is not as important as your justification. I'm going to say that again because it's that crucial. The justification is everything. Anyone can have an opinion. What your instructor's looking for is a well-reasoned argument. So don't just say the company should recall the product. Instead, say something like, from a utilitarian perspective, a recall is the best option because it protects the greatest number of customers from harm. However, looking at it through a justice framework, we must also consider the economic impact on the factory workers who might be laid off. You see the difference? That's a top-tier answer. It shows you can think critically and see the problem from multiple angles.
So we're going to end with this powerful thought from Potter Stewart. Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do. As a leader, you are going to spend your entire career living in the tension between those two things. Just because something is legal, just because it's profitable, just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. Your true test as a leader will be how you choose to act in that gray area. When those two things conflict, which path will you take? The answer to that question will define everything.